March 15, 2018, Portland, Oregon. The morning fog hung heavy over the residential streets of southeast Portland, when what should have been a routine custody exchange became the beginning of a mystery that would haunt a family for 6 years. 4-year-old Ethan Williams was scheduled to return to his mother Sarah's home on Sunday evening after spending the weekend with his father, David. But as Monday morning arrived, the little boy was nowhere to be found. Sarah Williams, a 28-year-old nurse at Portland General Hospital, first sensed something was wrong when she received a call from Sunshine Preschool at 9:30 a.m. The school administrator informed her that Ethan had not arrived for his scheduled classes, marking the first unexcused absence in his young academic record. Sarah's initial concern quickly transformed into panic when her repeated attempts to contact David went straight to voicemail. The custody arrangement between Sarah and David had been established 18 months earlier following their bitter divorce. Every other weekend, Ethan would stay at David's modest apartment in the Hawthorne district, a routine that had proceeded without incident for over a year. David Williams, a 31-year-old former construction supervisor, had never missed a scheduled return time, making his sudden absence all the more alarming. Portland Police Bureau responded to Sarah's missing person report at 11:45 a.m. Detective Michael Rodriguez, a veteran investigator with 12 years of experience in family crimes, was assigned to lead the case. His initial assessment painted a troubling picture. David's apartment at 2847 Southeast Division Street appeared undisturbed, with no signs of forced entry or struggle. However, several of David's personal belongings remained in the residence, including his wallet, keys, and work clothes. The investigation took on increased urgency when patrol officers discovered David's 2014 Honda Civic abandoned in the long-term parking lot at Portland International Airport. The vehicle had been sitting in the same spot since Saturday afternoon, according to parking enforcement records. Inside, investigators found Ethan's car seat properly installed in the back, along with a small Spider-Man backpack containing coloring books and crayons. Notably absent was David's iPhone, which had stopped responding to calls and text messages since early Sunday morning. Detective Rodriguez's team expanded their search to include airport security footage and passenger manifests. No record existed of David or Ethan boarding any commercial flights departing Portland during the weekend time frame. However, the airport's vast network of terminals and parking areas provided numerous opportunities for someone to leave the facility undetected through alternative means. Sarah's cooperation with investigators revealed concerning details about David's recent behavior. 3 weeks prior to the disappearance, David had requested additional overnight visits with Ethan, citing his desire to spend more quality time with his son. Sarah had agreed to the extended weekend arrangement, unaware of what investigators would later discover about David's deteriorating circumstances. Employment records obtained by police showed that David had been terminated from his position at Northwest Construction Solutions on February 28, exactly 2 weeks before Ethan's disappearance. His supervisor reported that David's work performance had declined significantly over the previous months, with frequent absences and apparent distraction during projects. The termination had been due to safety violations and failure to meet project deadlines. Financial institutions provided additional pieces to the emerging puzzle. Bank records revealed that David had withdrawn $8,200 in cash from his savings account over the course of 5 separate transactions during the week leading up to the disappearance. These withdrawals had effectively emptied his account, leaving only $47 in checking. More disturbing was the discovery that David had cashed out his modest 401k retirement plan 3 days before taking Ethan for what was supposed to be a routine weekend visit. Neighbors in David's apartment complex reported unusual activity in the days preceding the disappearance. Mrs. Catherine Chen, who lived in the adjacent unit, observed David loading several large duffel bags into his car on Thursday evening. She had initially assumed he was planning a camping trip with his son, a activity they had enjoyed together on previous occasions. However, no camping permits had been issued in David's name, and no reservations existed at Oregon state parks or private campgrounds. The Portland Police Bureau issued an Amber Alert at 6:30 p.m. on Monday, March 16th, broadcasting descriptions of both David and Ethan across Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. The alert included photographs from Ethan's most recent school pictures, showing a bright-eyed boy with sandy brown hair and hazel eyes, standing 3 feet 2 inches tall and weighing approximately 35 pounds. As the first 48 hours of the investigation concluded, Detective Rodriguez faced a troubling realization. Unlike typical child abduction cases involving strangers or custody disputes with clear geographical destinations, David Williams appeared to have meticulously planned his disappearance. The combination of liquidated assets, abandoned vehicle, and missing communication devices suggested a level of premeditation that made traditional search methods significantly more challenging. Sarah Williams spent those first nights in a state of agonizing uncertainty, surrounded by family members and victim advocates from the police department. Her sister Jennifer had traveled from Seattle to provide support, while her parents maintained a constant vigil at Sarah's home. The house that had once been filled with Ethan's laughter and toys now felt hollow and eerily quiet. The investigation team expanded their efforts to include David's known associates, former co-workers, and extended family members. His brother Thomas, who lived in Bend, Oregon, reported no contact from David in over 6 months. David's parents, who resided in a retirement community in Arizona, expressed shock at the news and confirmed they had not heard from their son since Christmas. As Thursday, March 19th approached, marking the 4th day of Ethan's disappearance, investigators discovered something that would fundamentally alter the direction of their search. Hidden beneath a stack of automotive magazines in David's apartment, Detective Rodriguez found a series of printed emails and internet search histories that painted a chilling picture of long-term planning. The evidence suggested that David Williams had not acted on impulse, but had been researching and preparing for this moment for months. What they found in those documents would reveal the true scope of his deception and force investigators to confront a possibility far more sinister than a desperate father making a spontaneous decision. The investigation was about to uncover evidence that would suggest David had been planning not just to disappear with his son, but to ensure they could never be found. March 20th, April 15th, 2018, Portland, Oregon. The documents discovered in David Williams' apartment revealed a methodical preparation that chilled investigators to their core. Detective Michael Rodriguez and his expanding team found themselves confronting evidence of a plan that had been months in the making, orchestrated by a man who appeared to have anticipated every aspect of law enforcement's response. The printed emails, dating back to November 2017, showed correspondence with various travel agencies specializing in off-grid destinations and remote cabin rentals. David had inquired about long-term accommodations in rural areas of Montana, Idaho, and Northern California, specifically requesting locations with limited internet connectivity and minimal neighboring properties. More disturbing were his searches for homeschooling materials and child psychology resources focused on helping children adapt to dramatic life changes. FBI Special Agent Angela Martinez joined the investigation on March 21st, bringing federal resources to bear on what was now classified as an interstate kidnapping case. Her team's analysis of David's digital footprint revealed a pattern of behavior suggesting sophisticated planning. Browser histories recovered from his laptop showed extensive research into countries without extradition treaties with the United States, false identity creation, and methods for living off the grid with children. The financial investigation deepened when banking specialists discovered additional accounts that David had opened under variations of his legal name. These accounts, established at 3 different credit unions across Portland, had been systematically funded through small cash deposits over the previous 8 months. The total amount accumulated across these hidden accounts exceeded $15,000, funds that had been withdrawn in their entirety during the week before Ethan's disappearance. Sarah Williams provided investigators with crucial insight into David's psychological state during their marriage and subsequent divorce proceedings. She revealed that David had always exhibited controlling tendencies, particularly regarding Ethan's upbringing and education. During their custody battle, David had repeatedly expressed concerns about Sarah's influence on their son and had fought aggressively for increased visitation rights. Court documents from their divorce showed that David had accused Sarah of attempting to alienate Ethan from his father, allegations that family court mediators had found to be unsubstantiated. The investigation expanded to include David's employment history and personal relationships. Colleagues from Northwest Construction Solutions described him as increasingly paranoid and suspicious in the months leading up to his termination. Foreman Robert Chen reported that David had begun making unusual comments about government surveillance and the importance of maintaining privacy in personal affairs. These observations, initially dismissed as workplace stress, now took on ominous significance. Surveillance footage from various Portland locations began painting a timeline of David's final preparations. Security cameras at outdoor equipment stores showed him purchasing camping gear, non-perishable food supplies, and children's clothing in sizes larger than Ethan currently wore. The clothing purchases were particularly telling, as they suggested David was planning for Ethan's growth over an extended period, indicating he never intended to return. The breakthrough came when investigators located the storage unit that David had rented under a false name 3 months before the disappearance. Unit 247 at Southwest Storage Solutions contained a treasure trove of evidence that revealed the true scope of his preparation. Inside, police found boxes of legal documents, including research on changing identity, guides for living without traditional employment, and disturbing materials about isolating children from outside influences. Of particular concern were the educational materials David had assembled. The storage unit contained grade-appropriate textbooks, learning software, and curriculum guides that would have allowed him to educate Ethan without ever enrolling him in a traditional school system. Child psychologists consulted by the FBI expressed alarm at materials focused on helping children forget their previous lives and adapt to new family structures. Detective Rodriguez's team discovered that David had also been researching Sarah's work schedule and daily routines with unsettling thoroughness. Calendar printouts and handwritten notes detailed her shift patterns at Portland General Hospital, her regular shopping locations, and her social activities. This surveillance suggested that David's planning extended beyond simply taking Ethan, potentially including measures to avoid detection, even if Sarah attempted to locate them independently. The investigation revealed David's growing isolation from friends and family members during the months preceding the disappearance. His brother Thomas, when interviewed by federal agents, described increasingly infrequent contact and strange conversations where David seemed preoccupied with theoretical scenarios about starting over in life. David had asked hypothetical questions about how someone might disappear completely, and whether Thomas would support a family member who made such a choice under extreme circumstances. Technology specialists working with the FBI made a disturbing discovery when they analyzed David's computer equipment. Despite his apparent sophistication in planning, David had made crucial digital errors that provided investigators with valuable intelligence. Deleted internet searches revealed research into child trafficking networks and underground communities that helped people disappear. While there was no evidence that David had made contact with such networks, the searches indicated he was aware of their existence and potential utility. The psychological profile developed by FBI behavioral analysts painted a picture of a man experiencing what specialists termed paternal possessiveness disorder, a condition where a parent becomes obsessively focused on maintaining exclusive control over their child. Dr. Melissa Thompson, a forensic psychologist consulting on the case, explained that individuals with this psychological pattern often view the other parent as a threat to their relationship with the child, leading to increasingly desperate measures to maintain control. As April approached, the investigation had generated over 200 tips from across the Pacific Northwest. Each reported sighting required careful verification, consuming valuable resources while David and Ethan remained missing. The most promising lead came from a gas station attendant in Spokane, Washington, who reported serving a man and small boy matching their descriptions on March 17th. However, security footage from the location was inconclusive, and no further evidence supported the sighting. Sarah Williams faced the agonizing reality that her son's disappearance was not a spontaneous act of desperation, but a calculated crime that had been in planning for months. The knowledge that David had been methodically preparing to take Ethan while maintaining the facade of cooperative co-parenting added layers of betrayal to her already overwhelming grief. Support groups for families of missing children became her primary source of emotional stability as the investigation continued without resolution. The media attention surrounding Ethan's case intensified as details of David's planning emerged. National news outlets picked up the story, broadcasting Ethan's photograph and David's description across the country. However, investigators worried that the publicity might drive David deeper underground, potentially forcing him to take more extreme measures to avoid detection. As spring arrived in Portland, Detective Rodriguez and Special Agent Martinez faced a troubling reality. Despite extensive federal resources, sophisticated investigative techniques, and nationwide publicity, David Williams had successfully vanished with his 4-year-old son. The evidence suggested a level of preparation that indicated David had studied law enforcement procedures and anticipated their response strategies. The investigation team prepared for a long-term missing persons case, establishing protocols for following up on tips and maintaining active surveillance of locations where David might eventually surface. However, what they discovered in David's research materials would soon lead them to a chilling realization. David Williams had not simply planned to disappear with Ethan, but had been studying methods that would ensure his son could never reveal their location or ask for help. The true horror of his preparations was only beginning to emerge. April 2018, March 2020, multiple locations. 2 years had passed since Ethan Williams vanished with his father David, and the investigation had transformed from an urgent rescue operation into a methodical long-term manhunt. The trail had gone cold, despite the most extensive missing persons investigation in Oregon state history, leaving Detective Michael Rodriguez and FBI Special Agent Angela Martinez grappling with a case that seemed to have no resolution. The psychological toll on Sarah Williams had been devastating. Once a vibrant nurse who took pride in caring for others, she had become consumed by the search for her son. Her apartment walls were covered with maps, photographs, and timeline charts tracking every potential lead and sighting. She had taken extended leave from Portland General Hospital, dedicating every waking moment to what had become her singular obsession: finding Ethan. The investigation had generated over 2,200 reported sightings across North America. Each tip required careful verification, drawing resources from multiple law enforcement agencies. A reported sighting in Yellowstone National Park in June 2018 had prompted a massive search operation involving park rangers, FBI agents, and search and rescue teams. The 3-day operation yielded no evidence, adding to the growing frustration of investigators who found themselves chasing shadows across an increasingly cold trail. Private investigator William Thompson had been hired by Sarah's family in August 2018, bringing specialized expertise in locating missing persons. His background in military intelligence and experience with international cases provided new perspectives on David's potential strategies. Thompson's analysis of the evidence suggested that David possessed knowledge or training that exceeded what his employment and education records indicated, raising questions about hidden aspects of his background. The breakthrough that reinvigorated the investigation came from an unexpected source. In September 2019, customs officials at the Canadian border intercepted a suspicious passport application submitted under the name Daniel Williams. The photograph accompanying the application bore a striking resemblance to David, though facial recognition software could not provide definitive confirmation due to apparent surgical alterations to the applicant's appearance. The fraudulent passport application had been submitted through a document mill operating out of Vancouver, British Columbia. Canadian authorities, working in cooperation with the FBI, conducted raids that uncovered an extensive network specializing in creating false identities for individuals seeking to disappear. Among the seized materials, investigators found partial records suggesting that someone matching David's description had inquired about obtaining documentation for himself and a child. More disturbing was the discovery of educational records within the document mill's files. Forged transcripts and homeschool completion certificates had been prepared for a child identified as Ethan Williams, indicating that David was planning to establish his son's identity within a legitimate educational system. The documents suggested that Ethan would be presented as having completed several years of home education, allowing him to enroll in formal schooling without raising suspicions about his academic background. The investigation revealed that David had been systematically studying cases of successful disappearances, learning from both criminal and legitimate examples of people who had vanished without trace. Digital forensic specialists recovered deleted files showing David's research into witness protection program procedures, asylum seeker processes, and immigration patterns that could provide cover for their disappearance. Sarah Williams underwent extensive interviews with FBI behavioral analysts attempting to understand David's mindset and predict his long-term strategies. These sessions revealed disturbing details about David's relationship with Ethan that had not emerged during the initial investigation. Sarah recalled instances where David had begun preparing Ethan for potential separation from his mother, using subtle psychological techniques to gradually diminish the child's attachment to his previous life. The analysis of David's research materials revealed a particularly chilling aspect of his preparation. Child psychology experts discovered that David had been studying techniques used in cult recruitment and deprogramming, specifically focusing on methods for helping children adapt to new family structures and forget previous relationships. These materials suggested that David intended to systematically erase Ethan's memories of his mother and his life in Portland. International cooperation expanded the investigation's scope as Interpol became involved in tracking potential sightings across multiple countries. Reports emerged from remote locations in Canada, Mexico, and several Central American nations where witnesses claimed to have seen a man and child matching the Williams descriptions. However, each international lead proved as elusive as the domestic sightings, adding to the growing sense that David had successfully vanished into a world where traditional law enforcement techniques were ineffective. The financial investigation took on new dimensions when banking specialists discovered that David's research had included detailed studies of cryptocurrency and offshore banking systems. Evidence suggested that he had been converting assets into untraceable digital currencies months before the disappearance, providing him with financial resources that could not be tracked through traditional banking surveillance methods. Detective Rodriguez faced increasing pressure from departmental administrators to scale back the investigation's resource allocation. The case had consumed thousands of hours of investigative time and significant federal resources without producing actionable leads. However, the discovery of the Canadian document mill renewed hope that David's careful planning might eventually lead to his downfall through the very systems he had attempted to exploit. The psychological profile of David Williams continued to evolve as new evidence emerged. Dr. Melissa Thompson's analysis suggested that David's actions were consistent with individuals experiencing what specialists termed parental alienation syndrome, but taken to extreme conclusions. Rather than simply attempting to turn Ethan against his mother, David appeared to be implementing a complete identity reconstruction that would make reunion impossible. Sarah Williams's determination never wavered, despite the mounting evidence that her son might be permanently lost. She had liquidated her savings to fund private investigations, traveled to follow up on promising leads, and maintained an active presence on social media platforms dedicated to finding missing children. Her unwavering hope became both a source of inspiration and concern for investigators who worried about her psychological well-being. The investigation's focus shifted toward understanding David's potential support network. Analysis of his communications and financial records suggested that he had not acted entirely alone in planning and executing the disappearance. Someone with specialized knowledge of identity fraud and document creation had provided assistance, though investigators had been unable to identify these collaborators despite extensive surveillance and financial analysis. As 2020 approached, marking nearly 2 years since Ethan's disappearance, the investigation team prepared for the possibility that the case might never be resolved. Cold case protocols were established, ensuring that any future developments would receive appropriate attention while acknowledging the reality that David Williams had successfully executed one of the most sophisticated parental abductions in FBI history. However, what investigators could not have anticipated was that David's meticulous planning contained a fundamental flaw that would ultimately lead to his discovery. The very psychological techniques he had studied and implemented to control Ethan would eventually backfire in ways that even his extensive research had not prepared him for. The child he had worked so hard to isolate and reprogram was about to demonstrate a resilience and intelligence that would shatter David's carefully constructed disappearance. The stage was set for a breakthrough that would come from the most unexpected source. Ethan himself, now 6 years older and far more capable than the 4-year-old boy who had vanished from Portland. What happened next would prove that even the most sophisticated criminal plans could not account for the unpredictable nature of human determination and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. November 8, 2024, Portland, Oregon. 6 years and 8 months after 4-year-old Ethan Williams vanished with his father, Sarah Williams was preparing for another sleepless night when her phone illuminated with a text message that would change everything. The notification appeared at 11:47 p.m., displaying a number she didn't recognize and a message that stopped her heart. "Mom, it's me. I need help. He doesn't know I have this phone." The message originated from a prepaid cellular device purchased with cash at a convenience store in Durango, Colorado, according to immediate FBI tracking protocols that had been established years earlier. Within minutes of Sarah's frantic call to Detective Rodriguez, now a lieutenant with the Portland Police Bureau, federal agents were coordinating with Colorado law enforcement to triangulate the phone's location and establish surveillance in the area. Special Agent Martinez, who had maintained oversight of the Williams case throughout the years, assembled a crisis response team that included FBI behavioral specialists, child recovery experts, and tactical units trained in high-risk rescue operations. The message's language patterns and vocabulary were immediately analyzed by linguistics experts who confirmed that the communication was consistent with a 10-year-old child's writing style and showed remarkable similarity to samples of Ethan's early communication attempts from before his disappearance. The phone that transmitted the message had been purchased at a Walmart in Durango 3 days earlier by a man whose physical description matched David Williams's current estimated appearance. Store security footage showed an individual wearing a baseball cap and keeping his face turned away from cameras, demonstrating the same careful attention to surveillance that had characterized David's behavior throughout his disappearance. A second message arrived 43 minutes later. "I remembered your phone number. He told me you didn't want me anymore, but I never believed him. Please come get me." The raw emotion and specific details within the communication provided investigators with crucial intelligence about Ethan's psychological state and his relationship with his father over the preceding 6 years. FBI child psychologists analyzing the messages identified several encouraging indicators about Ethan's mental condition. The fact that he had retained his mother's phone number and maintained doubt about David's claims suggested that his father's attempts at psychological manipulation had not been entirely successful. More importantly, his ability to access and operate a communication device indicated that David's control over his environment was not absolute. The investigation team immediately began analyzing cell tower data to track the phone's movement patterns over the previous 3 days. The device had remained in a concentrated geographic area, roughly 12 miles northeast of Durango, in a region known for its remote cabin rentals and off-grid residential properties. The mountainous terrain and sparse population density provided ideal conditions for someone attempting to remain hidden from authorities. Local law enforcement in La Plata County had been quietly briefed on the Williams case years earlier as part of a nationwide alert system for long-term missing persons. Sheriff's deputies familiar with the remote areas surrounding Durango began conducting discreet reconnaissance missions, mapping potential hiding locations while maintaining sufficient distance to avoid alerting David to their presence. The third message from Ethan arrived the following morning. "I go to the library sometimes when he thinks I'm hiking. The librarian is nice. Her name is Grace. I think she might help." This communication provided investigators with their most actionable intelligence yet, identifying a specific location where Ethan had been able to access outside contact and potentially establish a relationship with an adult who could assist in his recovery. Grace Mitchell, the head librarian at the Durango Public Library, was contacted by FBI agents and provided crucial information about a young boy who had been visiting the library regularly over the past 8 months. She described a child who appeared to be homeschooled and was always accompanied by an older man who remained distant while the boy used computer terminals and browsed educational materials. Mitchell's observations painted a picture of a child who seemed intelligent and well-behaved, but exhibited signs of social isolation and anxiety around authority figures. She had noticed that the boy often lingered near the children's section, watching other kids interact with their parents in ways that suggested he found these normal family dynamics fascinating and unfamiliar. The librarian's description of the accompanying adult matched updated forensic projections of David Williams' appearance after 6 years. More significantly, she had observed the man's controlling behavior, noting that he monitored the boy's activities constantly and seemed uncomfortable when the child interacted with library staff or other patrons. FBI technical specialists established that Ethan had been using library computers to search for information about missing children and had apparently memorized his mother's phone number from repeated viewings of missing person websites. The sophistication of his search techniques and his ability to avoid detection while accessing these materials demonstrated remarkable intelligence and determination for a child his age. The rescue operation faced significant challenges due to the remote location and David's demonstrated paranoia about surveillance. Tactical teams needed to position themselves without alerting David, while ensuring Ethan's safety remained the primary priority. The mountainous terrain and limited access routes meant that any approach would need to be carefully coordinated to prevent David from fleeing with Ethan to even more remote locations. Behavioral analysts expressed concern about David's potential reaction to discovery. His extensive preparation and psychological investment in maintaining control over Ethan suggested that he might view capture as the ultimate failure of his carefully constructed plan. FBI profilers warned that individuals with David's psychological profile often responded to cornered situations with unpredictable and potentially dangerous behavior. Sarah Williams was transported to a secure FBI facility in Denver, where she remained in constant communication with the rescue team while being prepared for potential reunion with her son. The psychological preparation for this moment was extensive, as specialists warned that Ethan might have difficulty immediately recognizing or trusting his mother after 6 years of separation and psychological manipulation. The fourth message from Ethan provided the breakthrough investigators needed. "We live in a green cabin near the old mine. There's a red truck outside. He's going to town tomorrow morning. I'll try to get to the library." This intelligence allowed surveillance teams to identify the specific location where David and Ethan had been hiding and establish a timeline for the rescue operation. Aerial reconnaissance confirmed the presence of a green cabin structure approximately 15 miles northeast of Durango, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that wound through dense forest terrain. The property appeared to be completely isolated, with no neighboring structures visible within several miles. A red pickup truck was indeed parked outside the cabin, matching Ethan's description perfectly. The rescue team faced a critical decision point. They could attempt to apprehend David when he left for town, potentially allowing for a safer extraction of Ethan from the cabin. Alternatively, they could wait for Ethan to reach the library as planned, though this approach carried the risk that David might discover the boy's absence and flee before agents could respond. As dawn approached on November 10, 2024, the rescue operation entered its final phases. Multiple tactical teams had positioned themselves around the cabin, while child recovery specialists prepared for what would be one of the most emotionally complex rescue operations in FBI history. After 6 years of searching, Ethan Williams was finally within reach of rescue. However, what investigators had not anticipated was that David Williams had been preparing for this moment as carefully as he had planned the original disappearance. Hidden within the cabin were contingency plans and escape routes that would turn the rescue operation into a dangerous game of psychological warfare, with Ethan caught in the middle of a confrontation that would test everything he had learned about survival during his years in captivity. November 10, 2024, Durango, Colorado. At 5:47 a.m., as the first light of dawn filtered through the dense Colorado forest, FBI tactical teams initiated what would become one of the most complex child recovery operations in the agency's history. The green cabin that had sheltered David and Ethan Williams for nearly 2 years stood isolated in a clearing surrounded by towering pine trees, its windows dark and seemingly peaceful in the early morning silence. Special Agent Martinez coordinated the operation from a mobile command center positioned 2 miles from the target location. Multiple surveillance teams had maintained visual contact with the property throughout the night, confirming that both David and Ethan remained inside the structure. Thermal imaging equipment detected 2 heat signatures within the cabin, providing crucial intelligence about their positions and movements. The operation plan called for a coordinated approach designed to minimize risk to Ethan while preventing David's escape. A primary tactical team would position themselves at the cabin's front entrance, while a secondary unit covered the rear exit. Child recovery specialists, Dr. Patricia Reynolds and Agent James Crawford, prepared to provide immediate psychological support to Ethan following his extraction from the environment where he had lived for over 6 years. At 6:15 a.m., surveillance teams reported movement within the cabin. David Williams appeared at a window, scanning the surrounding forest with binoculars in a routine that agents had observed for 3 consecutive mornings. His paranoid surveillance behavior demonstrated the same careful attention to security that had allowed him to remain hidden for so long, but it also revealed patterns that tactical teams could exploit. The breakthrough came when Ethan appeared at a different window, clearly visible to agents positioned in elevated observation posts. The 10-year-old boy looked remarkably similar to the age progression photographs that had been circulated by the FBI, though he appeared somewhat smaller and more cautious than typical children his age. His movements suggested constant awareness of his father's presence and approval, indicating the psychological control that David had maintained throughout their disappearance. Agent Martinez made the critical decision to proceed with the rescue operation when surveillance teams confirmed that David was following his established routine of preparing for a supply run to town. The window of opportunity was narrow, as David typically completed these trips within 2 hours, but it provided the safest scenario for Ethan's extraction without direct confrontation between the boy and armed agents. At 7:23 a.m., David Williams exited the cabin and approached his red pickup truck, carrying a backpack and maintaining his characteristic vigilance about potential surveillance. Tactical teams remained concealed as David started the vehicle and began navigating the narrow dirt road that led away from the property. Radio communications confirmed that mobile units were tracking his movement while maintaining sufficient distance to avoid detection. The moment David's vehicle disappeared around a bend in the forest road, child recovery specialists approached the cabin with extreme caution. FBI protocol required them to assume that Ethan might have been instructed to hide or attempt escape if approached by law enforcement, as David's psychological manipulation could have included preparations for exactly this scenario. Dr. Reynolds approached the cabin's front door, while Agent Crawford positioned himself to observe Ethan's reactions and provide support if the boy became distressed. The door was unlocked, consistent with David's confidence in the property's isolation and his belief that discovery was unlikely. Inside, the cabin revealed the reality of Ethan's life during his 6 years of captivity. The interior was spartanly furnished, but meticulously organized, with educational materials, books, and basic living necessities arranged in a way that suggested rigid routine and control. A small bedroom contained a single bed, children's clothing, and toys that appeared to have been carefully selected to provide entertainment while discouraging any connection to Ethan's previous life or the outside world. Ethan was discovered in the cabin's main room, sitting at a small table with educational worksheets spread before him. His initial reaction to the agent's arrival was one of fear and confusion rather than relief, demonstrating the effectiveness of David's psychological conditioning. Dr. Reynolds immediately began employing specialized techniques designed to reassure abducted children and establish trust with potential rescuers. The child's behavior during those first crucial minutes revealed the extent of David's control over his environment and thinking. Ethan repeatedly asked about his father's location and expressed concern about being in trouble for allowing strangers into their home. His responses indicated that David had successfully convinced him that law enforcement represented a threat to their safety and well-being. However, Dr. Reynolds quickly identified encouraging signs that Ethan's core personality and intelligence had survived his ordeal. When shown photographs of his mother, Sarah, recognition flickered in his eyes, despite his attempts to maintain the emotional distance that David had taught him. More significantly, when asked about the text messages he had sent, Ethan demonstrated the courage and determination that had made his rescue possible. The extraction process required careful psychological management as Ethan struggled with conflicting emotions about leaving the only home he could clearly remember. Dr. Reynolds explained that they were taking him to see his mother, but Ethan's responses revealed the depth of David's manipulation regarding Sarah's alleged abandonment of her son. Years of carefully constructed lies had convinced Ethan that his mother had chosen not to search for him. Agent Crawford's role became crucial when surveillance teams reported that David's supply run was concluding earlier than anticipated. Mobile units tracking his movements confirmed that he was returning to the cabin, necessitating immediate evacuation of Ethan and the rescue team. The operation's success now depended on extracting Ethan before David discovered the breach of his carefully maintained security. The rescue helicopter, which had remained on standby at a discreet landing zone 3 miles from the cabin, was immediately summoned to extract Ethan and the recovery team. However, the sound of the approaching aircraft created additional psychological stress for Ethan, who had been conditioned to view any outside contact as dangerous. Dr. Reynolds worked frantically to maintain the boy's cooperation while preparing him for transport. At 8:41 a.m., just as the rescue helicopter approached the cabin's clearing, surveillance teams reported that David's truck had stopped approximately 1 mile from the property. Radio intercepts suggested that David might have heard the aircraft and was investigating the unusual activity in his area. The operation entered its most dangerous phase as agents realized that David was returning to a situation that would immediately reveal the rescue operation. Tactical teams prepared for potential confrontation while prioritizing Ethan's safe evacuation. The boy was successfully loaded into the rescue helicopter, though his distress was evident as he was separated from the only environment he had known for most of his conscious memory. Dr. Reynolds maintained constant contact with Ethan during the flight to Denver, working to prepare him for reunion with his mother while addressing his fears about David's reaction to his disappearance. The helicopter had barely cleared the forest canopy when David Williams's truck appeared in the cabin's clearing. Through aerial surveillance, agents watched as David immediately recognized that the property had been compromised. His reaction was swift and decisive, abandoning his vehicle and disappearing into the dense forest that surrounded the cabin, beginning a manhunt that would test every resource available to federal law enforcement. What investigators discovered inside the cabin after David's flight would reveal the true horror of Ethan's captivity and the sophisticated psychological manipulation that had kept him compliant for 6 years. Hidden compartments contained detailed journals documenting David's systematic efforts to erase Ethan's memories of his previous life, along with contingency plans that suggested he had been prepared for discovery and had backup locations where he could continue his control over his son. The rescue operation had succeeded in recovering Ethan Williams, but David's escape into the Colorado wilderness meant that the case was far from over. As Ethan was transported to Denver for medical evaluation and reunion with his mother, federal agents prepared for what would become one of the most extensive manhunts in regional history, knowing that David Williams would not surrender quietly to the collapse of his carefully constructed world. November 10th, December 15th, 2024, Denver, Colorado. The reunion between Sarah Williams and her son Ethan took place in a specially designed family room at the FBI's Denver field office, under the careful supervision of child psychologists who had prepared for this moment throughout the rescue operation. 6 years and 8 months after Ethan's disappearance, mother and son faced each other across a gap that represented far more than lost time. Sarah's first glimpse of her 10-year-old son revealed a child who bore little resemblance to the carefree 4-year-old she remembered. Ethan appeared cautious and withdrawn, his movements careful and measured in ways that suggested years of rigid control and surveillance. However, when Sarah spoke his name softly, recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by confusion and emotional conflict that reflected the psychological manipulation he had endured. Dr. Patricia Reynolds guided the initial interaction, explaining to Ethan that his mother had never stopped searching for him, and that David's claims about her abandonment had been deliberate lies. The revelation that his mother had spent 6 years trying to find him created visible emotional turmoil for Ethan, who struggled to reconcile this truth with the carefully constructed narrative that had shaped his understanding of his situation. The medical examination conducted at Denver Children's Hospital revealed that Ethan was physically healthy, but showed signs of psychological trauma consistent with prolonged isolation and control. Dr. Michael Chen, the hospital's chief pediatric psychiatrist, noted that Ethan exhibited hypervigilance, difficulty with authority figures, and emotional responses that suggested systematic conditioning designed to maintain dependence and compliance. Meanwhile, the manhunt for David Williams intensified across the Colorado wilderness. The FBI deployed additional tactical teams, search and rescue units, and specialized tracking personnel familiar with the rugged terrain surrounding Durango. David's intimate knowledge of the area and his demonstrated survival skills made him a formidable fugitive who could potentially evade capture for extended periods. The investigation into the cabin revealed the sophisticated nature of David's psychological manipulation techniques. FBI specialists discovered detailed journals documenting his systematic efforts to reshape Ethan's memories and personality. The writings revealed David's belief that he was protecting his son from a corrupt world and his mother's alleged negative influence, demonstrating the delusional thinking that had driven his criminal behavior. Hidden within the cabin's walls, investigators found backup documentation and supplies that confirmed David's preparation for discovery. Multiple false identity documents, additional cash reserves, and maps marking remote locations across several western states indicated that he had developed elaborate contingency plans for continuing his control over Ethan, even if their primary hiding place was compromised. On November 14th, 4 days after the rescue operation, tracking teams located David Williams approximately 12 miles from the cabin, where he had established a makeshift shelter in a natural cave formation. His capture required careful coordination between ground teams and aerial surveillance, as David had positioned himself in terrain that provided multiple escape routes and natural defensive positions. The confrontation that led to David's arrest demonstrated the extent of his psychological deterioration during his years of isolation. FBI negotiators reported that David expressed genuine belief that he had been protecting Ethan from harm and that law enforcement represented a threat to his son's well-being. His complete disconnect from reality regarding the criminal nature of his actions highlighted the severity of his mental condition. David Williams was formally charged with federal kidnapping, child endangerment, identity fraud, and multiple counts related to his systematic efforts to evade law enforcement. The comprehensive evidence collected during the investigation, including his detailed journals and the sophisticated planning materials, provided prosecutors with an overwhelming case that demonstrated both premeditation and the ongoing nature of his crimes. The legal proceedings revealed additional details about David's psychological condition and the methods he had employed to maintain control over Ethan. Expert testimony from child psychologists explained how David had systematically isolated his son from outside influences while gradually reshaping his understanding of reality and family relationships. The testimony painted a disturbing picture of psychological manipulation that had continued for over 6 years. Ethan's recovery process began immediately following his rescue, with a team of specialists working to address the psychological trauma while helping him reconnect with his mother and adjust to life outside his controlled environment. The process was complicated by Ethan's conditioning to distrust authority figures and his confusion about basic social relationships that most children take for granted. Sarah Williams faced her own challenges as she worked to rebuild a relationship with a son who had been systematically turned against her. Family therapy sessions focused on helping both mother and son navigate the complex emotions surrounding their reunion while addressing the years of separation and manipulation that had shaped Ethan's understanding of their relationship. The investigation's conclusion brought closure to one of the most complex parental abduction cases in FBI history. David Williams ultimately pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for a sentence that would ensure he remained in federal prison for the remainder of his life. The plea agreement included provisions requiring him to provide complete cooperation with ongoing psychological evaluation and research into parental abduction cases. Dr. Reynolds and her team documented Ethan's recovery process to contribute to research on helping children who had experienced similar trauma. His resilience and gradual readjustment provided valuable insights into the long-term effects of psychological manipulation and the potential for recovery when appropriate support systems are implemented. The case prompted significant changes in law enforcement protocols for long-term missing persons investigations. The techniques developed during the search for Ethan Williams became part of standard FBI training for agents specializing in child recovery operations. The sophisticated tracking and analysis methods that ultimately led to David's discovery established new precedents for locating individuals who had successfully disappeared for extended periods. Sarah Williams returned to Portland with Ethan in December 2024, beginning the process of rebuilding their life together. The transition was challenging, as Ethan required extensive support to adjust to normal childhood experiences and relationships. However, his gradual recovery and renewed connection with his mother demonstrated the resilience of family bonds even after years of systematic manipulation. The house that Sarah had maintained as a shrine to her missing son was gradually transformed back into a home where a 10-year-old boy could discover the childhood experiences that had been denied to him. The process was slow and sometimes difficult, but each small milestone represented progress toward healing and normalcy. Ethan Williams' case became a landmark example of how sophisticated criminal planning could be overcome through persistent investigation, technological advancement, and the determination of a child who refused to forget his mother despite years of psychological manipulation. His courage in reaching out for help had not only secured his own rescue, but had provided law enforcement with valuable experience in handling similar cases. The investigation officially concluded on December 15, 2024, with David Williams beginning his life sentence at ADX Florence, a maximum security federal prison in Colorado. His detailed confession and the extensive evidence collected during the investigation ensured that justice was served while providing closure for the family whose lives had been shattered by his actions. As Ethan began the process of healing and rediscovering his relationship with his mother, the case stood as a testament to the power of hope, persistence, and the unbreakable bonds between parent and child. The boy who had vanished at age 4 had found the courage and intelligence to secure his own rescue at age 10, proving that even the most sophisticated criminal schemes could not permanently destroy the fundamental human need for truth, family, and freedom.